John actually got a diagnosis, and it was life-changing. He went from, a whole life of chronic illness with no explanation to a real understanding of his condition and the ability to problem solve about it and to connect with communities of support with other patients and their families. And so I think that like enabling this kind of effort is going to be huge, and it's really going to happen through decentralized technology.
Welcome to the DeSci Podcast. I'm your host, Erin McGinnis, and today we have an absolutely incredible conversation with Stanley Bishop, aka Science Stanley, where we'll be diving into AI and what it means to be a data scientist, how that's intersecting with decentralized approaches, and how this can be applied across individual health, collective health, the planet's health, ocean genomic sequencing, as well as to language models and what this could mean for the future of organizations and the future of work, as well as how to get connected or dive deeper into each of these different projects. So with that said, I'm really excited for this conversation with Stanley.
Yay! I'm so happy to be here, Erin. Thank you so much for having me on one of my favorite podcasts.
Amazing. So to kick us off, Stanley, I would love for you to share with me what exactly is a data scientist?
It is a great question, especially because just in the time that I've been working as a data scientist, the things that data scientists do and the projects they work on have transformed enormously. On a very basic level, all a data scientist does is apply the tools of math and statistics to understand the data produced from different projects and considerations. It's so funny because when I went to college and started working on my mathematics degree, everyone told me, "What are you going to do with that?" And it's been shocking how much the question has really ended up being, what can't you do with that? Data science right now is touching almost every area of human activity. I've worked on projects from, infant healthcare to social media recommendation optimization. And then, nowadays I work mostly in biotech. And so, being a data scientist, you're, a key member on almost any team, and in that way, it's really been an amazing perch to sort of watch the recent history of science from.
That sounds like it can be applied to so many really impactful domains. How has that led you to where you are today at LabDAO?
It's a great question, and I think an interesting answer starts with my very first data science job, which you're going to think I'm a little silly to say this, but I got it when I was 5 or 6 years old. And it was for my father's company. He had a company, a small startup in Silicon Valley called Roselle Electric. And it was an early Internet of Things company in the 80s. We would install computers into large buildings that would manage their energy. And, our deal was that we would take 10% of the savings kind of thing. And it was, an incredibly cool model, and it helped our clients very much. But, I think that we can all remember that good energy management systems for buildings didn't really appear until much later, like probably during the time of Nest. So I got some really early perspective into the fact that traditional economies don't always promote and support the most important projects. And so that has really tied in strongly to my experiences throughout my whole career. Have worked at some pretty big companies and on some pretty interesting projects, but always sort of felt some friction where politically you would often get a no for a project that really felt important.
I can imagine that transition from 5 years old through kind of this academic corporate journey into the world of DAOs and Web3 has been an interesting transition. Can you talk a little bit about how being a data scientist within a DeSci DAO, what that might look like for you?
Yeah, 100%. And it's really an interesting one. I think that the thing we're doing at LabDAO is actually pretty unique. We're creating something that's a bit of a hybrid. It's part academic department, and then it's part kind of like data science department at a typical startup. We work according to software engineering best practices. We use agile project management and all the good stuff, that you'd see at a FANG team. But then also we're working on projects that are more projects that an academic department might work on, things that have, scientific merit or potentially will have a great impact for a particular set of rare disease sufferers. So it's something we're sort of thinking of as the DeSci mullet. It's biotech in the front, hackathon in the back.
That's amazing. And as LabDAO continues to progress forward, what are some of the things you're working on right now or that might be coming up in the upcoming months that others could get excited about or there might be opportunity to engage with?
Oh, 100%. I have to say we got some really beautiful projects kicking at LabDAO right now. And the context of these projects is really cool to understand relative to this previous experience trying to get scientific computing projects greenlit at traditional companies. There's just so many times where you get a no for a political reason on a project that you really believe in, that you feel is important, and that you really feel needs to happen. Have some different examples of that. First one is I actually once made a big mistake of designing a bad manager detector for a large tech company whose products you have used today, certainly. I don't know if any of the listeners have ever had a really bad manager, the kind that makes you start wincing when you hear your Slack messages. But it turns out that they are statistically detectable in a corporation. They're these little abscesses of reduced productivity, and all of their interactions with their reports, it's quantifiable that they tend to slow down outcomes and reduce KPIs. And anyway, it turns out that this is not something that management necessarily wants to hear about at a traditional corporation. That that they have a bunch of bad managers, that there's some negative culture present, and that there's maybe something that needs to be done to correct that. This was something I was working on, and then I very excitingly brought it to my boss and was told to never bring it up again.
I feel like with this time of year of performance reviews being top of mind, maybe there's some interest from the audience listening in on giving this a new life. Can totally understand why some established systems or hierarchies may not be a fan of that, though. And I know some of the work that you're doing to disrupt some other systems that is also kind of a bit innovative and kind of ruffling some feathers potentially, but moving the world forward. Would love to kind of transition the convo into what kind of the overall structure at LabDAO you guys are building out, allowing for some of these really cool disruptive projects and initiatives to rise out of.
Well, especially with the advent of artificial intelligence technology, it's amazing how important a part of almost any modern science project the data layer is. almost any scientific team wanting to use these cutting edge techniques needs a data person to support. And quite frankly, there's a lot of scarcity. Machine learning scientists and engineers are in great demand. And a lot of the times, though, like to get a project off the ground, there's just a need for a little bit of early prototyping work and sort of I almost describe the LabDAO data science department as like a little skunk workshop. Like we're a sort of crack team. Think of it as like, the A team of data scientists and other data science professionals who, are passionate about science and passionate about telling stories to scientists where, they need some help and they find it over at LabDAO.
Who has that attracted in so far?
Well, like I mentioned, there's this interesting management psychometrics project that is kind of me revisiting my prior management trauma at larger corporations. And that's a project that LabDAO is doing in collaboration with our sister DAO, TalentDAO, who we love. So they're one of the really interesting partners we're working with. Another extremely cool project would be the LabDAO collaboration with Research to the People at Stanford Medicine. That's a very special clinic that does kind of last stand care for rare illnesses and oncology. And they work with some of the most cutting edge diagnostic and clinical modalities. And quite frankly, they're struggling a bit to keep up with the diversity of treatments and the data they produce. So LabDAO is partnering with them to help build a really robust data system so that clinicians can compare notes on, some of their patients who are getting these absolutely first time in the world applied treatments and, make sure that they're being used in the best way with their patients.
Completely. So with Research to the People, can you share a little bit about the specifics of what this project is addressing and how through your work you're able to help enhance the work that's already being done at the Stanford Lab Clinic?
Absolutely. And it's worth saying a little bit more about Research to the People because they are doing God's work here on Earth. They're a very special clinic. And to really understand their mission, it's pretty cool to remember where we are in the history of genetics. It's now possible to sequence a human genome relatively inexpensively. The price of sequencing a human genome over the next 5 to 10 years is going to drop like a rock to the point where it will be part of your normal checkup to get your genome sequenced. How exactly you integrate genomics into personal medicine is still a big question. There's things that happen where sometimes you get false positives so often that it's not actually worth testing for something on the systemic level. Sometimes there's situations where, you do a test and there aren't actually any positive interventions, and sometimes that isn't positive for the patient. So figuring out how to connect the dots with our, current healthcare system that has a lot of trouble, and this new healthcare system that's going to involve a lot of personal data and genomic information is a very hard problem that the whole medical field is grappling with right now. And I think of Research to the People as the sort of outpost on the frontier, explaining and understanding how these things are going to work. Research to the People partners with a very small number of patients every year, but for each of these patients, they remove all the stops, and under a compassionate care license, they perform every test and apply every treatment. And they're really pushing the envelope about what these techniques can do. Obviously, it's of great relevance and importance for any patient or the family of any patient dealing with a cancer or a rare illness, but they're also doing the pathfinding work for what will be the entire next layer of personalized genomic medicine. Let me tell you, though, at the current moment, the work ends up looking like juggling a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of multi-page Excel spreadsheets from different vendors that have different services and different information about how much data you can get from which tissue. And I think that the clinicians are pretty bogged down just figuring out what could be possible, and they don't have a tall enough perch to see, the whole landscape and really find the best treatment. So what LabDAO is doing with research to the people is building what would be called an integrated and translational data marketplace, where treatments can and sort of care modalities can be shared between physicians. Physicians can kind of compare notes and figure out the best clinical paths for their patients.
That sounds like it would be incredibly impactful and powerful for people that might have rarer or more complex and comorbid conditions. So I'm really excited to see where some of this work continues to go moving forward, and just how other clinics might also be able to look to this collaboration to provide more development support to different labs and help uplift those clinicians that have their own expertise but might be bogged down with some of the other additional tasks and just all the roles they take on in their daily functioning. Are there any other insights that you've gathered through this work about what the future of translational research might be able to look like?
It's a great question, and obviously I'm biased, but I really think the future is going to be decentralized. I was really lucky to meet research to the people through my friend John, and John was the subject of a documentary called Undiagnosed 1, and Undiagnosed 1 follows a research to the people hackathon. And the hackathons, and this is coming from a hackathon guy, the research to the people hackathons are amazingly fun. They will take a particular patient, they will apply some of these cutting edge genetic sequencing and analysis technologies, and then they will make that data available to a trusted network of researchers at all of the country's top institutions. And all of that firepower will be mobilized to find a diagnosis or a treatment course that can be more successful to that patient. And in this case, in the Undiagnosed 1 case, my friend John actually got a diagnosis, and it was life-changing. He went from a whole life of chronic illness with no explanation to a real understanding of his condition and the ability to problem solve about it, and to connect with communities of support with other patients and their families. And so I think that enabling this kind of effort is going to be huge, and it's really going to happen through decentralized technology. I think I'm really excited to see a marketplace where patients can have ownership of their data, and they can be connected with the thinkers and the clinicians who can apply the best treatments and the best science. And not just that, but by doing it in a kind of transparent and a reproducible way, we can all start to benefit from the de-siloing of that knowledge.
That has just so many mind-boggling, amazing implications down the line, and just how that will be able to be repeated. And it really seems like, based on your experience here, that this decentralization and taking that type of approach was essential for allowing this project to happen. Can you talk a little bit about what else might be possible with DeSci, or kind of what you're observing from that lens that decentralization might be allowing for?
Absolutely. And I mean, I think to your point, the research to the people case is a great example. The clinical director over there, said to me he was a little surprised that when we met, that we were so excited to help out. That kind of in the traditional academic system, people are very busy, and people are a little bit transactional, which isn't, a criticism. That's kind of human behavior. but that it was for him a totally different experience coming into the field of LabDAO and meeting a bunch of technologists who really, see the value first and then are more interested in, figuring out the details of the relationship once we're actually helping out. Like I sort of indicated before, and you might be all getting this vibe. In traditional companies, I was a person who was told no a lot, and so a little bit of the work at LabDAO is getting a chance to revisit some of these problems where I really wish I'd been able to contribute earlier in my career. And in addition to the management problem, in addition to the medicine problem, the climate is one where I would honestly admit I have a lot of guilt personally. I actually had been involved in, what's called metagenome technology. This is a kind of cutting edge application of multi-sequence assembly and alignment. So that's where you're taking the genetic material from potentially a preponderance of different organisms and putting it all together to make sense of the picture of what's going on in the ecosystem. These are very hard problems. These are very, very hard problems on the mathematical level. You can kind of imagine taking 10,000 different puzzles, dumping all the pieces into a blender, then stirring it up and trying to put it all back together. It's really a triumph of the modern age that we've reached a place where our computers are powerful enough to do this work. And it's only been possible in the past 4 or 5 years. And one of the potential use cases that is most important from my perspective, certainly most exciting to me, is using metagenome technology and environmental DNA technology to understand the ecosystem and to protect the ecosystem and to fight against climate change. And I very specifically had a situation where was building a metagenome pipeline to support the environment at a traditional biotech company right up until the point they sold it to an oil company, and kind of broke my heart. And I have to say, I think that this is one of the things that is very special to me about Web3 is there is much more of an emphasis on ownership and alignment within the teams that are building things. I actually have a perspective that part of how, in many ways at this moment we've gotten a little off the tracks is scientists have been building things without getting a seat at the table to discuss how those things should be used. Most scientists that I know fully understand the oncoming locomotive of the climate crisis, and if they got a vote, they'd be voting that we take it very seriously. And again, this is a situation where it's not a traditional business model. The ocean doesn't have a bank account, but that to me isn't why and how we should make decisions if we want to survive. And so I think the project I'm most excited about right now is a collaboration between Lab DAO and a group called New Atlantis. And New Atlantis is very specifically using this metagenome technology to quantify and support ocean biodiversity.
Amazing. So from individual or collective human health, now applying similar types of genomic sequencing methodologies through a decentralized kind of foundation, we're able to now explore ocean conservation and what looking at biodiversity can mean. Can you lay out what the future of this project might look like, or if there are any opportunities that others might be able to get involved with as well?
Oh, absolutely. And I love that you made the connection with the translational medicine, because that's, I think, just what we're hoping to do at New Atlantis. We're wanting to create a translational healthcare system for the oceans that's best in the world, because the oceans deserve it. And also, we won't survive without the oceans. But how does this work? And again, comparing to the medical cases is particularly illuminating. the ocean is very much like a body. Ocean water carries an enormous amount of different genetic material. Some of that is the free-floating organisms, the plankton. Some of that is the bacteria, and some of that is the sort of DNA that sloshs off of larger, or forgive me, that's a tough word, is emitted by larger organisms. And that soup isn't just evidence, but it's almost a genetic internet superhighway for the organisms in the ocean. In a very real way, yeah, the ocean is a body and the water is the blood. And in the same way, you can understand an enormous amount about a person's health by doing a blood test. You can understand way more than you would expect about what's going on in the ocean by sequencing the water. And it's going to be very important that we, start to do this pretty frequently. At the current moment, doing a sequencing campaign of ocean water, and again, like what we're talking about is sending out boats, collecting a large amount of water, filtering the water down to the genetic material, performing laboratory processes on the genetic material to extract the DNA, pushing the DNA through a sequencing device, taking the crazy puzzle pieces that come off of the sequencing device and putting them back together into a picture of the ecosystem. It's non-trivial. It's a pretty complex piece of data science to kind of do this work. And at the current moment, it's somewhat expensive. The main work in this field has been done by the Tara Oceans Foundation. Another really interesting example of DeSci in action. Tara Oceans is a foundation, so it's all charitable funded, funded by the fashion maven Agnes B, who will always be one of my biggest heroes as a result. And someone explained to her like 5 or 6 years ago, at the very first moment this technology was possible, that it was important to do for the oceans. And no one else was willing to pay for it except for some random fashion executive, which is, to me, kind of shameful. But thankfully she did, and the Tara Oceans expedition traveled all over the world collecting evidence of the genomic population dynamics of the world's oceans. At the cost of millions of dollars. Currently, New Atlantis is planning our pilot sequencing expedition, and several years later, that sequencing will probably be a six-figure budget for a similar sized expedition. In 5 years, it will be 5 figures to do that kind of sequencing or less. I actually suspect that in 5 to 10 years, you will see high school students taking portable sequencing devices that connect to their iPhones and actually going out to their local beaches and doing sequencing. And it's at that point that I actually get really excited because, for me, I grew up hearing about the sequencing of the human genome as one of the epic accomplishments of the preceding generation. I believe that in a similar way, the sequencing of the world's genome, the entire metagenome of the planet, will be one of the greatest works of our generation, and it will start with the oceans. In many ways, the ocean is a perfect subject for sequencing. It's a fully mixed bioreactor that has very measurable environmental dynamics that can be cross-referenced and indexed with the genetic sequencing. So we can store a data set that tells you very specifically as the temperature changes, which is a very important factor. How do the animals change? How does the genetic composition of the planktonic food web change? Collecting that data is New Atlantis' mission. Collecting that data and making it accessible to researchers in a decentralized way that's accessible all over the world. That's our big mission. We're hoping to sequence the world genome.
I think that's such a powerful example also of the potential impact that having all of these decentralized nodes or citizen scientists going out and collecting this data and sharing it together in this interconnected network, and the impact that can have leading off of the technologies and examples that have come before us.
I couldn't agree more. And it's funny because in the startup world, there's that phrase that's come up a lot, Uber for blank. Oh, this startup is Uber for dogs, or this startup is but
Completely.
what they're talking about is using a system of decentralized dispatch to organize a labor population. And that role where I was building management technologies was actually for one of these systems that managed a population of about 100,000 laborers. So the actual engineering of when Uber for blank actually makes sense as a business model and when it's just a silly pitch deck is one of my big things that I think about. And I really think that science is almost the perfect use case for decentralized effort. On some level, that's what science is. It's a collaborative, community-driven effort of building, a transparent, publicly agreed upon ledger of facts about the universe, verified through experiments.
I love that definition of science, and I hope anyone who is coming in from a scientific angle and might be newer to DeSci can start to take these first steps into the space based on the projects that we've talked about so far. If somebody might be coming in from a data scientist angle or some other type of scientific background, are there any recommendations you might have for them taking those first steps into Web3, just like you transitioned kind of into this newer space where getting told no isn't quite as frequent anymore?
Well, at least let's say the no's lead to conversations that are productive.
Yes.
Because we're still human and we still have to work with each other, and that always is complex. But yeah, leaving behind some of that structural baggage, I encourage everyone listening to come, see if it's a fit for you too. And just like Aaron says, if you're a scientist who has a project that's, been on your mind that could use some data science facilitation, maybe some machine learning expertise, please come over to LabDAO, check us out, and would love to support you. Would love to see if we can support you. If you're a data scientist who would love to get involved in some science and contribute your skills to some, important scientific computing problems that are making a difference, come check us out. We would love to introduce you to some of the people from the first category. And yeah, I think overall, we've already had some pretty distinct success helping projects get launched that otherwise wouldn't have. And I think we're in for a pretty magical year of the same. It's actually been particularly funny in the DeSci community because we are obviously in crypto winter. But I think everyone I know has been saying it's DeSci summer. There's been an enormous amount of success in this space with our projects at LabDAO, with the recent Gitcoin round, with the Pfizer position in the Vita and Molecule DAO ecosystem, with the paper published in Nature, and then many of the early DeSci-backed drug discovery papers starting to hit the journals. It's a really exciting time for the space, and I'm actually really hopeful that DeSci can show, not just that we're here to stay, but there are actually some non-fraud use cases for the blockchain. That actually having community-driven ledgers where people are democratically agreeing on facts is really a powerful thing, and it isn't about speculation. It's about building in community contexts.
I think that's a really great recap of some of the different work being done, especially in a more biological domain. But there's also work being done within a more social sciences aspect as well, and really kind of leaning into what that collaboration can look like across organizations, and also helping organizations thrive as they might be pursuing some of these other initiatives and missions too. So would love for you to share about some of your work at the intersection or collaboration point with TalentDAO as well.
Oh, 100%, man. I gotta say, I love TalentDAO. I love TalentDAO. I don't hate traditional HR, but I do think that traditional HR suffers a lot from a lack of flexibility. And, that is just the edge cases. But a lot of time, the edge cases are your most valuable people. And this is actually a pattern I've seen with organizations I've been managing. For example, that system that was trying to detect toxic managers, it turned out that the highest skill workers were the ones who were most likely to quit after a negative managerial interaction. Makes sense on the level of them probably being a little more cerebral, and all of us cerebral people are usually a little neurotic, but also they got other opportunities. So sort of like it's really interesting because a traditional centralized system can be right 99% of the time, but the 1% of the time it misses can be the most important times to get it right. And so there's actually a particular paper that proves this. And this was the genesis of my collaboration with Ken at TalentDAO. This paper is really beautiful, I have to say. The paper is about the linguistic patterns underlying about 500 medium to large publicly traded companies in the United States. And specifically, the researchers got access to all the corporate emails for these 500 companies. So they were actually able to build a database of everything every employee at each of these companies said to every other employee. So a gigantic linguistic network representing the activity of the companies. And what the researchers behind this paper were curious about is, what are the most successful linguistic patterns? So how do you talk to not get fired is what they were studying. And so what they did is, on a employee by employee basis, they built a psychometric profile representing many different dimensions of how the user communicates. And then they attempted to classify what types of voices, allowed retention as an employee over duration in the organization. And yeah, they found something very, very interesting. They found that for most employees, they were more likely to be retained the more they sounded like everybody else. Which, again, makes some sense. On the level of if you sound like the other people, you probably have been well selected to participate. Also, if you're sort of going with the program, you learn to talk like the people around you. That's just a very basic social skill. So it certainly makes a lot of sense that that's the main thing we're seeing. But there's something else we're seeing too, which is that for certain roles, the opposite is true. So for certain roles, the more different you sound than the rest of the company, the more likely you are to be retained. What kind of roles are we talking about? Scientists and engineers, right? And again, it's sort of funny when sometimes the data tells you a stereotype that we all know, right? Like scientists and engineers are difficult and they talk funny, right? It's true. But anyway, it turned out that it is very important for organizations to be able to include and support these very different people culturally in order to be successful. And it actually turned out that the original intention of this paper was to prove what makes employees successful in a company, but it ended up saying a lot more about what makes companies successful based on how they interact with their employees. It kind of turned out that the companies that were more successful at retaining the people who sounded different were the more successful companies over time. So anyway, this sort of led to a question of, what kind of tools could we make available to leaders to understand the different voices in their communities, how those voices interact, and how to support an optimally diverse, social ecosystem for their projects and communities. And obviously, this intersected with the era of the large language model, the transformer AI. These are the GPT systems you've been hearing about, the Midjourney systems, the DALL-E systems, these things that are really seemingly capturing intelligence in a silicon system in a really concrete and reproducible way. Really shocking time to be alive. But what we were really interested in partnership with TalentDAO is could we use these large language models to understand the network of linguistic interactions for an organization? And so far the answer has been like a big yes. We're still sort of building the team and performing our early experiments, but what we've been doing is taking a per user data set for each of our community members and training a custom language model as a digital twin of that user that sounds just like them. And then we're actually simulating conversations between the digital twins. So for example, before, say, having me and Ken have a conversation about certain topics, I could simulate a conversation about those topics between digital Stanley and digital Ken. And I'm going to say the level of accuracy, obviously these things don't say the exact same things that we do, but the accuracy in terms of the topics that come up, the sentiment, so how good and warm of a fit it is between the people, it's very close to actual conversations, even in the early stages of engineering. You actually can simulate a meeting before deciding that the people should have it. And you can, go into that meeting knowing that it's probably going to be a hit. So that's kind of the thing we're LabDAO is developing with TalentDAO, and it's called Project Lion for language informatics on networks.
Amazing. So is that a really kind of core use case that you would imagine this project or this type of technology being applied to, kind of giving people a better foundation going into different meetings? Otherwise, what other use cases or applications do you think others might want to engage with what you're working on?
We're really hoping that this will be a tool set that will provide community leaders with a pretty wide range of support for simulating their communities and making decisions about their communities. Obviously understanding person to person and small group interactions is interesting. Doing things like the company voice is really interesting. Like everyone's been seeing Chat GPT, this week as a really incredible technology that many of us are afraid is going to replace us. Imagine having a custom Chat GPT that sounds just like your community and is specifically trained on the knowledge base of your community and thus able to answer questions about, when are the office hours? What let's say it's New Atlantis, the ocean conservation project, what is the deal with the whales and plankton? What's the relationship there? And sort of by virtue of being trained on the particular corpus of the organization, that sort of like Chat GPT concierge would have that information. And so actually we do think that down the road, there will be a bunch of really interesting use cases where, these things can be used in that way. Gotta say too, do you watch Black Mirror?
I've seen some of it, yeah.
Again, like one of the things we're trying to do is keep our data science efforts like squarely outside of Black Mirror territory. But always think about the dating app episode of Black Mirror. Do you remember that one?
I think I might have missed that one, but keeping some of those frameworks in mind sound like a powerful kind of frame to maintain.
So forgive me if I just share this really quick, but this one episode of Black Mirror has It follows a pair of star-crossed lovers who somehow keep getting into a relationship and then breaking up over and over and over again. And it's not explained until the very end that they're not real, that the two lovers are actually digital twins of two people who exist in the real world. And this process of simulating their romances is how a dating app is figuring out whether they should be introduced.
Interesting. How are you keeping yourself away from Black Mirror territory with all of the projects you're working on?
Very carefully. Very carefully. This speaks to like a broader cultural thing where, decentralized effort is positive because you have to work with a broader range of people and cultures. I find very often that when us data scientists are sort of getting excited about stuff we can do with data and things that we can try to learn with machine learning algorithms, we do come up with ideas that sometimes have implications that don't occur to us. So, I have a kind of a trusted cohort of people from different fields who I will go to and I will get sort of some sounding from. But no, it's definitely not something that happens automatically, and it really speaks to the importance of maintaining discourse about these things with seats at the table for everyone.
Completely. And I can imagine kind of taking this more community collective focused approach to it might also be a mechanism to hopefully prevent against some of that as well. Within the broader landscape of AI at large, are there any other trends that you're noticing from like a data scientist trained background that might just be interesting or you're expecting to see pop up in the future, gain a bit more traction as well?
I do not think it's going to be at all shocking to say that large language models are going to be a big story for quite a while. Everybody really shocked seeing what GPT-3 can do with a little bit of reinforcement learning. That's essentially what Chat GPT is. GPT-4 is coming out soon, which will be 10 times more powerful than GPT-3. And I think people are going to be genuinely shocked. As an example, Chat GPT-3 is able to get about in the 60th percentile on SAT questions. I suspect that Chat GPT-4 will get a perfect score on the SATs. And I suspect that many tasks that would typically be given to junior developers in a software context will be doable with Chat GPT. I also think that in many other fields that have fields that entail knowledge work and that have an entry-level layer of kind of junior knowledge workers who support the work of more senior knowledge workers, I think we will see many of those lower levels of those pyramids like demolished. We will, and even just think paralegals. Like, could a lot of the work that a paralegal does be done by a properly trained and configured large language model? I think yes. I think 100% it's somewhat likely. And so I think that, we're going to very soon have a major societal problem to contend with that is very much illustrated by the issues around generative art right now. We have these generative art systems that will be, accelerating the work of some artists and destroying the work of many other artists. And unfortunately, those models were trained using the data produced by artists without any remuneration or ownership. And this is all being done before we have a system that is able to properly enumerate contributions to models. We're gonna, I think, need to build a system like that. And I think it's probably gonna require some smart contracts to sort of track who put what data into the stew. and make sure they get their fair bowl of the broth. But yeah, I think that the sort of the commercial operationalization of large language models is going to be one of the biggest stories. It's going to change how companies are formed and what a sort of startup company looks like. I think startups will be coming together with far fewer people. And I think we really will like immediately have to grapple with how we, support our junior knowledge workers and sort of create roles for them, where, we kind of do understand that they are not adding value in some sense relative to AIs, but that it's still very important to cultivate human knowledge, both to produce additional data for future models and to help, continue the pipeline that produces the more senior knowledge workers who are able to operationalize these tools.
Do you see some of these different points you've brought up about the necessity of building out these frameworks that recognize the knowledge that is put into a system, or what this future of work or organizational structure might look like? Do you see that being particularly relevant to the work you're doing at the intersection of the environment and the ocean with New Atlantis, or with the Stanford Clinic and research to the people? Or do you think other domains it might be a lot more relevant to in a more immediate kind of timeline?
I think that I'm so glad you asked that question. The idea of using smart contracts to make some of these systems more fair and equitable and make sure they remunerate all contributors applies to each of the projects we've been talking about. New Atlantis, for example, very particularly is hoping to create a system and a marketplace for biodiversity credits, things that could be bought and sold by large institutions the same way carbon credits are to offset deleterious environmental activities in other parts of their business. What is a biodiversity credit, though? On some level, a biodiversity credit has to represent proof that biodiversity exists and an intention, let's even say a plan to continue to preserve that biodiversity. How do you prove biodiversity exists? Well, like I was sharing, our core tool is the metagenomic analysis. And to perform a metagenomic analysis, you need literal boatloads of data and also algorithms and also scientific effort to analyze the output of the algorithms. So it's another one of these situations where you have a complex data project consisting of data contributions, algorithm contributions, scientific work contributions, and all of that kind of has to be baked together in a pie. And 100% the natural way to make sure that each contributor of an ingredient gets a piece of the pie is through smart contracts. So in the future, for example, for New Atlantis, our partners in the Mexican government will be contributing, genetic data from a very important whale breeding ground that is a marine protected area in Baja, and that will be combined with pipelines and protocols from a number of our scientists who are working on ocean issues in the EU, and then all of that will be sort of connected to some business related biodiversity structures, so that people can confidently invest in these things as instruments. And just there, it's such a cool use case of how decentralized effort expressed through smart contracts allows for projects to happen that are sort of integrated across multiple stakeholders, where you actually really couldn't in a traditional context.
Completely. I think you touched on a few really important points there, just around the financial structures that might either need to be built, or how incentive systems have been designed and how they might need to be shifted moving into this new era. Can you dive a little bit deeper into that topic?
Gosh, I do have to say, incentive and gamification are such deep subjects that touch on, so many different parts of human behavior. One thing that I've found with DeSci that I think has been functionally most important is the ability to be more careful and judicious in building a fit with a new collaborator. I quite frankly think a lot of us carry trauma from our time in school, where we were subject to this really weird way of working in isolation. Sit down with your test, don't say anything, don't talk to anybody, don't go on Google and look anything up. I find that's not how anyone works on any project in the real world. And yeah, I think that we carry some of that idea about how things are supposed to be with us. There's the stereotype, for example, of the leak coding interview, where you are sort of given in isolation a set of very hard code problems and told to do it. And then that process, this sort of like unnatural crucible of high pressured effort is how they make the decision about whether someone's going to join a team. And then to me, a broader and more important issue of how do they work together with the team isn't really explored or figured out until the decision to hire is made. So I often see at traditional companies situations where this very binary and kind of, I think of it as a mean-spirited hiring process, leads to teams that don't really work together well, and that often like sort of tend to flow into toxic directions when it comes to the sort of management interactions. In DeSci projects, and this is a pattern that's for me existed as a contributor to open source projects for a very long period of time. It's more typical to start a new contributor on an entry project, some relatively small piece that's well suited to their skills so that they're kind of like set up for success. But then to sort of have them build that in interaction with the rest of the team, so you can kind of see how they fit organically into the organization. That's been something that I've been kind of allowed to do more in the DeSci context that has been, just very successful. And not just because, you're able to make better decisions about who you include, but I think you're actually like often able to, find really good fits for people who wouldn't have found a fit through a normal process.
Completely. On that note, if you had to speculate about what the future of being a data scientist might look like as a role or profession, what might you envision would be in store?
It's a very good question, and it's actually something I've been wrestling with a lot in the past week or two, like what direction all this is headed. Just for example, like there's a lot of controversy about OpenAI versus Stability AI. OpenAI is not releasing their models. Stability is open sourcing their models. No one even knows which business model is going to take off. And so figuring out exactly like how we're going to be working with these technologies is definitely pretty challenging. But one thing that it does look like is Moore's Law has a lot of gas left in the tank. So in 5 years, the technical capital moat for training these systems is going to be much lower. So I actually think we'll see the pattern that we've seen with AlphaFold continue. Are you familiar with AlphaFold? Would it be helpful to say anything about that?
Yeah, I think giving an overview would just be good for foundation setting.
Yeah, so I mentioned the Human Genome Project as a sort of very important thing previously. I would almost say after the Human Genome Project, there was a bit of disappointment because we thought that once we knew what was in the genome, we'd be able to figure out everything. But it turns out that once the genome starts doing its business, a whole lot of magic is in the details of how the DNA unfolds, how it creates proteins, how the proteins fold, the shapes the dynamic shapes and interactions that the proteins make, there's a whole lot of complexity in there. So until just recently, we didn't have the ability to say too much. It was thanks to the incredible works of the DeepMind team that in the past couple of years we got access to a system called AlphaFold. And AlphaFold, you actually can tell it the sequence of a protein that you want to see, and then it will generate the 3D structure of the protein. It was fairly shocking when they did this. It was one of those things where, every year there was a big competition where the best computer teams doing this kind of work from all over the world would try to get 70% accuracy, 75% accuracy. All of a sudden, DeepMind comes in, total newcomers to the field, 99+% accuracy. Something that I've seen said and that I think is true is that if DeepMind was not a technology company, if DeepMind was, say, a laboratory at a university, the PI would have won the Nobel Prize in biology. And I think that's true. So it's a really interesting technology and a really interesting moment for the broader field. And AlphaFold has kind of taken over. I get almost nonstop requests to build AlphaFold for different laboratories as a kind of core part of their workflow. But we've already reached a point where for this year, for the big protein folding competition, AlphaFold lost. Or they didn't lose, but they didn't actually even come in the top 5. And every single project in the top 5 was an AlphaFold variant, which means to say some other laboratory took the core technology of AlphaFold and then applied their biology-specific knowledge to make it better. And I think that this pattern is the one that I think will repeat, that for a lot of different applications of AI to subjects, initially you'll get incredible results from AI-focused and AI-specific teams. But then a couple years down the road, when the ability to integrate teams with hardware improves, you'll see teams where, say for a legal AI, you have data scientists partnered very closely with legal scholars. And I think that this is actually going to lead to some role hybridization, where data scientists have sort of specialties in different spaces. And vice versa, I think it will push towards an increased data science literacy for a lot of practitioners in other fields. Like I do think that knowing at least how to integrate with, cloud data systems will be important for lawyers, will be important for everybody, actually.
Completely. I think you shared a really powerful example of how just increasing the access to a broader set of knowledge for the general population and the masses can be really impactful, and then making sure that gets into the hands of people who might have specific domain expertise and be able to take that to the next level. And just as you were talking, thinking about all of the different applications across other domains as well, beyond just the scientific application, is really exciting for me. If you had to sum up, what are some of the things that you are the most excited about right now?
Gosh, there's always such a long list, especially recently. I gotta say, today specifically, we might have some really good fusion energy news. And I gotta say, that is an area where I'm very excited. I think that there's nothing better that could happen for the world than the discovery of clean, carbon neutral fusion energy. Interestingly, DeepMind also supposedly has a fusion group that's trying to apply deep learning to fusion stabilization. But yeah, today definitely, I think even right after this interview, I will be logging in to see what comes out of the DOE press conference, where they're hopefully going to announce that for the first time, on Earth, a fusion and reaction with net energy has been carried out.
Yes, I'm super excited about that as well. Was diving into that a bit before this convo too. We've touched on so many really incredible projects, so many impactful topics that can really shape what the future of our individual health, our planetary health, and our understanding of one another and the organizations that we exist in. And I feel so lucky that I was able to hang out with you out in LA a couple months ago. And I know that you have some other upcoming events in your area coming up in the new year as well. Would you like to just give a little teaser on what might be in store in that region?
Oh, absolutely. So there is a pretty in the art community. There's a very well-known patronage studio in Venice Beach called the Budman Studios. Right on my wall over there is I did a 3D scan of the studio warehouses. The Budman Studios has been a nonprofit foundation supporting artists in LA for 30 years. Murakami, as an example, had some of his first studio space at the Budman Studio years and years ago. But many other artists, some less successful ultimately, got their very first studio space at the Budman Studios. And I encourage anyone in Venice Beach to check it out, budmanstudio.com for the website. And yeah, like for about the past 10 years, I've been running out of the Budman Studios a small technology incubator that works with a wide variety of projects. This was kind of like my DeSci before DeSci. Same motivation of feeling like many projects that are deserving of support and incubation don't get it. And we wanted to give it to them. And so, yeah, it's a very special kind of community center in Venice Beach. It's right across the street from the Google campus in Gold's Gym. And then, yeah, starting in the new year, we'll be doing a DeSci event probably every Wednesday. And then once a month, we'll be doing a Saturday hackathon with different technology partners. So information on the particulars of that will be forthcoming. But yeah, anyone interested in any of this stuff, we would absolutely love and be so grateful if you wanted to, spend some time with us in the new year doing science.
Amazing. Yes, we'll for sure get those events all listed on DeSci Global, and I'm sure you'll share a bit about that on Twitter at Science Stanley. If people are interested in connecting with you further, or if they're interested in any of the projects that you're working on, where is the best place for them to either learn more or get connected with you?
You can always feel free to @ me at Twitter, but I think the best thing to do is to check out the Lab DAO Discord or the New Atlantis Discord if the sort of marine project specifically resonates with you. But in either case, like just go right into the introduction channel, say hi, share who you are, do a little @ Science Stanley, and I'll pop right in and make sure you get connected to the right people to support you.
Amazing. I think that's such a great tip for the entire DeSci ecosystem, or people curious about this space as well, to just dive in. So thank you so much, Stanley, for coming on and sharing all of the amazing work you're doing and your perspective on the field of data science, AI, decentralization within each of these domains across individual health, ocean and marine biodiversity, and planetary health, and then also to linguistic models. And I think I can speak on behalf of the whole ecosystem in saying we're really glad you're working on all of these things and are collaborating across lines to make all of these projects come to life. So thank you for sharing that with us today on the DeSci Podcast.
Oh, like I said, what a blast to actually be on one of my favorite podcasts. And Aaron, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.